Alright, so this is how this whole thing is supposed to work. As you can tell, you got your water pump here, you got your tensioner here, various guides throughout the system, your variable valve timing, oil pressure, it's fed by oil pressure. It changes the timing of your variable valve timing. Behind here you got the cam phasers and two other chains, and adjusts your variable valve timing as well. But yeah, essentially, the main crux of the problem here is that, like you see on that engine, this water pump is under a lot of upwards pressure as the chain pulls on it as it goes around. And over time, eventually the bearings in this water pump go bad, and this whole entire assembly here gets loose. And when it gets loose, it starts leaking coolant straight down. And as you may notice right here, you have the wide open oil pan right there. And so when this thing starts pissing coolant out of here, it goes straight down into the oil pan, whereupon the oil system starts picking it up and spreading coolant throughout the oil system. And in many cases, you end up getting oil straight down in here through this through the bearings and seal back into the water pump, which you end up getting black coolant reservoirs and things of that nature with oil in the cooling system. But the main source of the issue is water in the lubrication system, which will eventually kill this engine. Now, the one I took out of there has got 131,000 miles. This is out of a used engine from LKQ that's got 89,000 miles. But even so, after that many miles, this is about what it's supposed to look like. Golden, shiny, oil-filled, or whatever its entire life. Not that disgusting sludge over there that happens when coolant pisses out of there and into the lubrication system. So anyway, you rotate this here, and essentially this is how the whole thing works. Okay? As you go around, as your engine's running, the chain goes around, does its whole thing. And what happens is, this keeps tension on it, and this is also fed by oil pressure. And so, to make up for any stretching or slack, it is adjustable according to oil pressure. And so as this stretches out a little bits over time, the tensioner will make up the slack, but it can only do so much until eventually the chain is so stretched, as in also was the case with that engine, where you end up with what's called a P0016, which is the sensors on the back of the engine down here in the... you can actually see this. This sensor right here is for the crankshaft, and then there's a sensor here and here for each camshaft. And these signals, as they go around, all have to match. They all have to match the computer programmed rotational speeds and whatnot. And if they don't, they set a check engine light and a code for a P0016, which is what happened to that. Because the chain was so slack and the water pump was so bad, the water pump bearings being bad and having all that crap, all the coolant got past the bearings and the seals and all that and got into the pan. But also, the water pump was so bad that it stretched the chain so bad that the chain ended up setting a check engine light, because these three sensors were not matching up correctly because the chain had been lengthened so much because the water pump was so far out of whack. So, with this engine having 89,000 miles, and the engine I took out having 131,000 miles, and me going through all this absolute fun and hell, putting a new engine in this car, which as you can see is a gigantic chore, for me to put this used engine up in the car without replacing each of these chains and that water pump, to not do that and let it just sit like that, this one would eventually go bad in about 20 to 30,000 miles, or about a year to a year and a half. This one would eventually end up looking like that one, which would negate the point and expense of going through all this crap. So for me to not put a pump and chains and tensioners and guides and cam phasers in there would just be ludicrously stupid. So that's why I have this $900 used engine apart, is because before this goes back in that car, this thing is getting chains, The rear chains as well, for the variable valve timing and the camshaft phasers and all that mess. I'm going to try to see if the owners can swing it to put in new cam phasers as well, and if we can afford it, new variable valve timing solenoids, but these things are rather pricey, and they're kind of only available in good quality from Ford, and so I don't know if we're going to be able to afford that, but this thing is at least getting 3 chains and a water pump. And I am RTVing the daylights out of that water pump, because I am not going through this again, and I feel horrible for the owners that they have to go through this. This was a $900 engine. The labor we're at is somewhere already over 100 or over 800, I guess it's 14.2 hours to swap an engine. It's 18 point something hours to do a long block, and essentially doing this is part of the long block procedure. So I'm charging 16 hours, not including a few other things I got to do on the car, brakes and lower control arms, and a couple extra hour things on there. Anyway, essentially I'm replacing all this and put the timing cover back on, and hopefully this sucker will run until the car says it's got 230,000 miles, and then at that point it'll probably end up doing the exact same thing again, at which point you junk the car. But this is for anybody who has a 2010 or newer Ford Fusion, and I want to say 2008, maybe even 2007. 2007, 8 or earlier Edge, and any of the Flexes that have ever been made, with 3.5, which is what this is, or the 3.7. They're all like this, and they all have the exact same problem. So, this is just kind of a video on basically what the issue is with this engine, it's costing people a ton of money, and normally I'm fine with Ford, more or less, but this has really got me hacked off at Ford right now on behalf of my customers, because nobody, with a chain-driven system, you should never have to go through this. Honda does a similar thing like this, where they put a water pump inside the timing cover off of a belt, but there's no opening down here to the oil pan, so when their water pump goes bad, you just take the timing cover off, put a water pump in, put belt in, tensioners, whatnot, 3-4 hours, you're done, and that's it. When the water pump fails, it does, on a Honda, it does leak, but you're only leaking coolant, and it just leaks it kind of out of the timing cover. There is no way on a Honda, for example, for coolant to get into the oil system. The problem with this one is some idiot at Ford decided that this was a real good idea to leave this wide open like this, with absolutely no protection or anything at all to prevent coolant from going straight down into that pan, and that's what causes all of these problems. So, like I said, rather hacked off at Ford right now, I'm doing what I can to help my customer as best I can, to minimize this happening again and going through all this hassle and rather large expense, because they have another vehicle that's got this engine, and I've got a few other customers that have other vehicles with this engine, and I don't want to have to see them go through this. It's fine for me, helps me, pays me money, but that's out of my customers' pockets, and my customers aren't just customers, they're friends. So, and in this case, family. So, at any rate, that's a video of basically what the issue is with this engine, and there you go.